Hi, Bill.
Hi there. How you doing?
I'm very well.
Are you feeling the economic foundation crumbling under your feet?
No, I'm one of those Main Streeters who hasn't felt it yet. We are again taping on Thursday before the 4 o'clock powwow with Obama, McCain, and Bush. So
and a day before we may or may not have a presidential debate.
Right. So again, our entire discussion could be mute by the time it's shown. But we'll try to keep it relevant anyways.
Well, there certainly was a lot, I think, in the blogosphere in regards to the bailout that are relevant as to how the politics have played out over the week. I think you saw there's a lot of discontent in both the liberal and the conservative blogospheres, which helped air and make the public backlash very clear very quickly that prevented quick passage of what the Bush administration put on the table originally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of it was blog-driven as much of it was blog-reflected, but from what we're hearing on Capitol Hill, members are getting calls that they say are 1,000 to 1 against this, against the Paulson plan, the bailout, and I think you're seeing that in the blogs. You have some people with more shall we say economic training, like the Megan McCardles of the world on the right, the Larry Kudlows, etc., who are saying yes, something needs to be done. And, of course, we'll get to that in a second. Megan and Larry, too, have their own concerns. But then you get the more kind of populist blogs like the Michelle Malkins of the world, who are absolutely 100% against the bailout and have been from day one. And I think it's the same story you're seeing on Capitol Hill, is that you have a lot of members who listen to Bernanke and are convinced, but then they go back to their offices and their staff tells them that the phones are just off the hook against it.
Now on the left, I think there was a moment, I believe it was over the weekend. Paul Krugman, who is a New York Times columnist, also maintains a blog on the New York Times website, and he has been fairly engaged with the liberal blogosphere over the course of his tenure as a columnist. I think his engagement with the blogosphere has grown over time. And a lot of liberal bloggers look to him for guidance on economic matters, because obviously a lot of bloggers are not economic experts. And when he put out a post that said, the Treasury plan, by contrast, looks like an attempt to restore confidence in the financial system, that is, convince creditors or troubled institutions that everything's okay, simply by buying assets off these institutions. This will only work if prices Treasury pays are much higher than current market prices. That in turn can only be true either if this is mainly a liquidity problem, which seems doubtful, or if Treasury is going to be paying a huge premium, in effect throwing taxpayers' money at the financial world. And there's no quid pro quo here. Nothing that gives taxpayers a stake in the upside. Nothing that ensures the money is used to stabilize the system rather than reward the undeserving. I hope I'm wrong about this, but let me say it again. Treasury needs to explain why this is supposed to work, not try to panic Congress into giving it a blank check. Otherwise, no deal. So
I was about to say, you buried the headline there, because that was the title of the whole post, right?
No deal.
No deal.
Sorry, big finish.
Oh, okay.
So when he said no deal, I think that was very galvanizing to folks on the left. My boss at Campaign for America's Future, Robert Borisage, had a longer post on our blog on Huffington Post that laid out 7 principles that should gird any bailout package. There should be taxpayer accountability along with taxpayer money. Taxpayers should have a share on the upside. Shut down the casino with better regulations. Curb excessive CEO pay. If firms are going to be entering into this bailout deal, they shouldn't just be walking away with big golden parachutes with taxpayer money. Invest in the real economy. If you're going to put this much money on the table, some of that should be going into rebuilding infrastructure and creating jobs, and aiding the victims of the financial crisis and not just the predators of the financial crisis, not to mention also curbing political corruption, making sure Wall Street firms are not writing these rules, in the back rooms without transparency. So that has been the approach that a lot of bloggers have followed in this.
Well, let me stop you right there.
Sure.
Because I think we should separate two issues here. And first of all, there's so much in that I think I disagree with. But we'll put that aside. We have two separate issues here. First, we have whether or not some type of federal action is necessary, or whether there is no credit crunch going on and the federal government doesn't have to act. Because I think there is a lot of debate on the right and the left as to whether that's going on.
There is some of that on the left. Some of that was actually driven up by another New York Times person, David K. Johnson.
Right. So let's talk about that first, because I think Crosby and your boss think there something should be done. They just have a different picture for it. But there's also a lot of debate on the left and right in the blogosphere about whether or not anything should be done to begin with. So let's talk about that debate first.
Sure. Talk away.
Oh, sure. I think Megan McCardle, the only reason I keep my subscription to The Atlantic, has been just phenomenal on not only giving the larger theory as to what's been going on, but also taking the much harder step to finding and highlighting concrete examples of how this problem is going to manifest itself.
You're not a Mark Ambider fan?
I do like Mark, but I'm not as head over heels in love with him as I am with Megan. But she's been posting a number of kind of insider emails talking about how Caterpillar, which is a great company, they stay out of the mortgage mess. They have done nothing wrong as a business, but because of the credit crunch, they're having to pay premiums in order to borrow the money that they need to meet payroll, et cetera, and that they are being punished by this credit crisis, and they have no reason to be punished. She had a similar post about Honda about how they're facing the same credit crisis, and those costs are all being passed on to consumers, and so that you have companies and larger economic actors and firms, which really have no fault at all, that are being sucked down in this credit crunch. And that there are lots of people like Megan who believe that there needs to be some type of action. Then on the right, you have kind of more libertarians like Arnold King at Econologue, who says
Megan's not on the right.
What?
Megan's not on the right.
Well, she's more the right than Arnold King, who's been saying that there is no credit crunch, and that basically we haven't seen the fall. There's been no effect on mainstream yet, and that we should wait to see if there actually is a problem. And it's my understanding that there are similar doubts on the left.
Yeah, there's some, and there certainly is a skepticism that this need to be done within a 48-hour period, and definitely people were making parallels to the Patriot Act, to the authorization of military force for Iraq. Some were calling this the authorization of financial force.
Yeah, I think Glenn Greenwald had that post up in about an hour after the
Right.
Paulson thing came out.
People refer to Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, which is a touchstone for a lot of liberal bloggers. That these panics are sort of created to force actions when people can't quickly look at the details. But when you do have, and I should have, I think I mentioned before, David K. Johnson's memo to journalists, which was posted on Jim Romensko's media site, laying out all sorts of questions that need to be asked. If there is such a credit crunch here, why am I seeing on AOL all these pitches for all these awful mortgages still?
Right. Well, why are people still sending me credit card notices? Why are people offering me money if firms in Wall Street can't get it?
Right. But there's still, I would still think that amongst the, liberal progressive economist class, there seems to be a consensus that there is a need for some sort of action here. Krugman would say that on the blog Economist View, they sort of weighed the pros and cons to the need for any action and sort of came up with, sure, you can make an academic argument, maybe we don't, but that's not an experiment that I really want to run right now and see what the result of that is. So I think there still is a tipping point towards doing something, but making sure that it's done right and not in haste, making sure there is an equity stake, so you're not just having a transfer of wealth from the middle class into the
now we're crossing
class.
into the what should the plan look like?
Yes.
But yeah, I think we both see that there is among the the blogs with the most economic training and economic focus, there definitely is more of a consensus that there is a problem in the credit market that calls for some type of federal backstop or intervention. And of course, once that debate starts, then we start getting into the larger ideological differences that you were hitting on before.
Now, there's obviously the debate here is about the nature of government intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And you have George Bush last night saying, hey, I don't like government intervention, but boy, this is a really bad situation. What else are you going to do? To what degree is this roiling the conservative blogosphere? Because obviously the whole notion of government intervention is distasteful by the nature of being conservative. How are folks reconciling that?
It is roiling the conservative blogosphere to a large degree. I mean, if you go through the corner, it's a great place because they have just, people can throw up their thoughts at any time. You have John Derbyshire against, John Holt against, Lowry for, Catherine Lopez has been kind of supportive, Jonah Goldberg's been definitely against. I mentioned before Michelle Malkin is been against from the beginning. Eric Erickson has been kind of more supportive, and it's like you laid out. There is definitely a strong strain of free market. There has to be market discipline. The people that made these bad bets have to pay up, otherwise just create a moral hazard down the line, and that. The Fannie Freddie problem, all the other bailouts, they're just part of a long line that has led up to this, and the buck needs to stop somewhere.
Now, I do see a consistency,
right,
with the different, even when the conservatives are disagreeing, that this is somehow inherently the fault of government as opposed to the fault of deregulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would point folks to Economist View again. That's Mark Thoma's blog. He usually does a very good job of bringing in other economist views, and has done a series of posts about how the problems of Fannie and Freddie are a symptom of what's going on, and there's certainly decisions that were made by the heads that were not good decisions, but they were not directly doing subprime loans because regulation prevented them from doing so.
Yeah, I saw that too, and it's the same argument Krugman made.
Right, I mean, it's keying off of Krugman's column from back in
right, and it just leaves out
July.
a humongous portion of the puzzle, which is the fact that Fannie and Freddie weren't buying the loans themselves and then repackaging them, but they were buying the packaged mortgages from other people. So for
that's right.
Let me finish here. Krugman ignores this. Krugman ignores this.
Read Krugman's blog too. Don't we just like?
No, I did read his blog. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would allow Countrywide to go out, make a bunch of loans, and then normally at that point, Fannie and Freddie come in, buy the loans, package them, and then sell them off. But what Countrywide was doing was they were making a bunch of subprime loans, packaging them themselves, and then selling that security. And there was no regulation that prevented Fannie and Freddie from buying those securities. And they bought those.
That's correct.
And they bought lots of them.
No one's disagreeing with that. But that doesn't mean that Fannie and Freddie caused the crisis.
Let me ask this question. How much of the total market in subprime securities do you think Fannie and Freddie bought?
That's not the point.
How is it not the point?
It's not.
We're talking about how much they're involved, how core they are to this issue.
I'm going to read you Economist View here. Fannie and Freddie became fairly large players in the subprime market, and they got that way by following the rest of the market down in lowering lending standards, etc. But they did not lead it down. Their actions came in response to a significant loss of market share, and it's this loss of market share that motivated them to take on more subprime loans. We need to understand why the overall market, part outside of Fannie and Freddie's domain, was able to lower lending standards and increase their risk exposure in other ways as well, and how regulation, which had worked up to that point, failed to keep Fannie and Freddie from dutifully responding to the market pressures on behalf of shareholders by duplicating the strategy themselves. But again, they were followers, not leaders, until Republicans started trying to claim that Fannie and Freddie caused the financial meltdown as a means of tying Obama to the crisis, a strategy that backfired badly when all of the embarrassing connections of Fannie and Freddie within the McCain campaign were revealed.
We'll get to that later.
Nobody was saying Fannie and Freddie caused the crisis.
That's not true at all.
Republicans simply
We've been
worked
saying
backwards.
it for a long time. I've been saying it since March. You still haven't answered my question. At the height of the boom, the height of the bubble, what percentage of the subprime market was Fannie and Freddie buying?
That's not the point.
Oh, it isn't. What if they bought 100%? Would you say that they were definitely a big cause of it?
Did they?
No. What?
Okay,
but the percentage matters. What if they bought, say, like 5%? They clearly weren't, right?
The point is,
No.
They were.
The point is how much
the point
of
is they were followers and not leaders.
What the hell does that matter? How much of the market were they buying at the height of the boom? How much of the market were they buying at the height of the boom?
Do you know the answer?
44%. Okay. That's a lot. That is driving the market.
No one disagrees with that.
No one disagrees with that. They leave that out.
You don't answer the question where that means they're the symptom or the cause.
They are the cause. The purpose of Fannie and Freddie is to inject capital into the into the mortgage market so that there's more money, so that more loans could be made. So at the height of the real estate boom, that's exactly what they were doing, was pushing as much government-backed money into these crappy subprime mortgages to feed the bubble as much as possible. 44% of the market. Up to $388 billion worth of these subprime securities that they own. That's how much of the money they injected into this crappy market. And they were able to do it because they are able to lend at low rates on the government's good name. They're absolutely at the core of this. And we've been saying this. I've been blogging about this since early March.
Well, I will happily, to avoid us going back and forth on this for the rest of the segment, I will happily put up the posts from Krugman, from Dean Baker, from Economist View that lay this out in much more detail. And if you would be happy to acknowledge how deregulation played a role in this.
No, not at all. Please do make the case.
Of course not.
Do make the case.
Deregulation has nothing to do with anything.
Do make the case. What deregulation specifically caused the housing bubble?
Well, I will read to you. I'll read you some from Obama's speech in March.
Great.
There were good arguments for changing the rules of the road in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
Our economy was going under a fundamental shift, carried along by swift currents of technological change and globalization. For the sake of our common prosperity, we need to adapt to keep markets competitive and fair. Unfortunately, instead of establishing a 21st century regulatory framework, we simply dismantled the old one, aided by a legal but corrupt bargain in which campaign money all too often shaped policy and watered down oversight. In doing so, we encouraged a winner-take-all, anything-goes environment that helped foster devastating dislocations in our economy. Deregulation of the telecommunications sector, for example, fostered competition, but also contributed to massive overinvestment. Partial deregulation of the electricity sector enabled market manipulation. Companies like Enron and WorldCom took advantage of the new regulatory environment to push the envelope, pump up earnings, disguise losses, and otherwise engage in accounting fraud to make their profits look better, a practice that led investors to question the balance sheet of all companies and severely damaged public trust in capital markets. This was not the invisible hand at work. Instead, it was the hand of industry lobbyists tilting the playing field in Washington, an accounting industry that had developed powerful conflicts of interest, and a financial sector that fueled overinvestment. A decade later, we have deregulated the financial services sector. We face another crisis. A regulatory structure set up for banks in the 1930s needed to change because the nature of business had changed. But by the time the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed in 1999, a $300 million lobbying effort that drove deregulation was more about facilitating mergers than creating an efficient regulatory framework.
Okay, so that's great. So the only thing that you cited there that was a specific deregulatory move was the Glass-Steagall Act, correct?
Well, the Glass-Steagall Act did, and I know you guys have been on the Heritage blog saying that shouldn't be what we point to.
Yeah. So could you explain to me exactly what in the Gramm-Leach-Bliley bill that repealed the specific Glass-Steagall Act provision? Could you explain to everyone what exactly the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act did?
What it did was Glass-Steagall kept a firewall between different financial companies,
specifically investment banks and commercial banks. Right. Okay. So how did getting rid of that cause the financial housing bubble?
The problem is, as Obama had laid out there, it's one thing to say yes that was outdated regulation that needed to be reformed. But if you're gonna take down that firewall, there's a whole new host of issues you're going to have to deal with, and you better have a 21st century regulatory framework to deal with them. We have all these kinds of new financial instruments. You didn't answer my question, and neither does Obama. It's completely empty, meaningless rhetoric. How specifically? Paint me the picture. How did allowing investment banks and commercial banks to merge cause the current financial trouble? The problem is that once you have all these guys doing different kinds of creating all these financial instruments like derivatives and hedge funds and mortgage-backed
Glass-Steagall had nothing to do with derivatives.
What's that?
Glass-Steagall had nothing to do with derivatives or all that other stuff. It didn't forbid them. It didn't say they could be created, couldn't be created. It had nothing to do with that.
But everyone was working out of different pools before, and now you had all of these mergers, these larger companies. I mean, you essentially have a thing like AIG.
Uh-huh.
You know, we're supposed to have.
Was AIG affected by Glass-Steagall at all, or the repeal of it?
You're supposed to have.
The answer is no.
You're supposed to have antitrust regulation.
That's a completely other area of law.
So companies don't get too big, and so if an individual company falls, it doesn't take down the entire system.
What antitrust laws were repealed?
The point is that when we're creating a merger-happy environment in general, without any kind of additional oversight, without any kind of concern about how big companies were getting and what kind of impact it would be if they were acting in an irresponsible way. So you had essentially a blank slate instead of readapting the rules to deal with the current environment.
Yeah. Okay, I think what we established here is that there is no earthly reason why the repeal of Glass-Steagall's provisions between investment banking and commercial banking causes this current clash of law. If anything, it's made it possible for the system to keep working as it has. Look at who's died.
The argument is not that Glass-Steagall. The argument is not necessarily that Glass-Steagall should have been repealed.
Okay.
The argument is that once you repeal it, there are other things that you should have also been doing to deal with the current situation, deal with the current modern investment world.
So your case has suddenly changed from not that there was a bunch of deregulation that happened that was bad and that caused this, but that there should have been a completely rework. There should have been more regulation.
There should have been smarter regulation that was reflective of the current global economy.
And of course, Obama hasn't named what this regulation should have been. He just has to call for some vague.
I'm sorry they didn't read you his entire speech from March 2008, but he lays out exactly what that framework should be.
But I think we at least got you to admit that the repealing of the Glass-Steagall provision, the Graham-Leach Bliley, did nothing to cause the current crisis.
I did not say that.
Okay.
I said that it was part of a deregulation philosophy.
Deregulation philosophy.
That, by the way, was driven by Phil Gramm and conservatives in Congress, but signed by Bill Clinton.
So there was an ethos. There was an ethos created, and it's the ethos's fault.
And because all the emphasis was on deregulation, and there was no complement to that about how do we replace the old regulations with new regulations that fit the current economy.
Sarbanes-Oxley was more regulation or less regulation?
It was a slight swing back in the pendulum because of the Enron disaster.
Okay. And I'll also throw in a couple of blog posts about how Sarbanes-Oxley has also contributed to this mess.
Oh, I'm sure. That's exactly the problem. Let me give you a personal example. I've done a couple of shows this week, radio shows where I've got into this. I am a first-time homeowner. When I went to a mortgage broker to get a mortgage, the mortgage broker sold me on a ridiculous adjustable rate mortgage. And I asked all the proper questions. It didn't quite smell right to me. Didn't understand why a fixed rate, didn't make more sense.
Wait, tried to sell you or sold you? Did sell. Okay.
I was effectively snookered into getting a really stupid mortgage. Because everyone talks about, how does this happen? All these reckless and greedy homeowners that cause this problem, we should be dumping all over them. And so I'm trying to explain to people what actually goes on in these situations. The problem is, at least in my particular situation, sure, this was not a subprime loan. I could afford the house that I was buying. But there are certainly people in the mortgage industry that have an interest in leeching me of my equity and taking more of my money.
But they just want the fees.
Right. Well, the broker wants the
fees.
The commission.
Right, the commission, the fees.
The mortgage company wants to be able to, jack up the insurance rates and make sure I'm putting more into interest and less into principal. So the mortgage broker sells me on the adjustable rate mortgage package. Say they make sense for me because I'm a first-time homeowner. I'm not going to be in my house for more than 5 years. You want to start with the lower rate. It's going to be capped. It's not going to move up that high. Blah blah blah. What I do not know, what I am not told, because there is no regulation mandating it so, is that broker does not have to tell me that he gets a fatter commission steering me into that mortgage than into a fixed rate mortgage. So I go into this relationship with the assumption that I'm paying for a service that's supposed to give me straight advice, that he's not trying to sell me something. The presumption of the broker is I've already made the decision to buy a mortgage. He is supposed to guide me into doing the best one for me. And I am not told that is not the relationship that I have, that he is working for somebody else, and I'm unaware of that. So that is the kind of situation where you've created all these new types of mortgages that didn't exist in the 1930s. You've allowed those instruments to be created, but you did not have any complementary regulatory oversight to make sure those things don't get out of hand. And that is one of the reasons why you've had all these. I was able to get out of that situation. I had to pay a penalty for it. I was able to walk down the street to my local community bank and get a fixed-rate mortgage without even dealing with the broker. But I'm not in as worse a situation as a lot of other people are, and that's why you have so many defaulted mortgages, because of the poor regulation that got people into situations they shouldn't have been in.
Yeah, or people should read contracts when they're buying $100,000 or more assets.
I read my contract. Mortgages are complicated. Even for college-educated people, they're complicated. That is why you pay experts. That's why brokers exist, because it's difficult for individual people who are not mortgage experts to know what it is they're getting into. And that's why you have regulations. That's why you have guidelines. That's why we try to outlaw fraud so people don't get screwed. Because when that happens, it doesn't just affect the poor schmuck. It affects the entire economy, and that's the situation that we have right now. And I'd like to see for you, sir, whether you think that even if you like Graham Leach Biley, if you could possibly think of one situation where deregulation has not worked out, can conservatives take a shred of responsibility for the current economic situation? I think if they did that, they would be much better off going forward, because most of the country, Obama and McCain are debating right now who is the better regulator, because most of the country gets that deregulation is at the core of these problems.
Yeah, most of the country just hears the word regulation, deregulation. They like the Graham Leach Biley thing. They do not follow the details of what the law actually said or the changes that are going on.
So they're stupid is what you're saying.
Yes. Yes. But, on to your other point, as far as blame goes around, Michelle, who's against the bailout, has been bashing the Bush administration as she likes to do, pointing out that their ownership society is also guilty in far as this Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac thing, that the Bush administration has been guilty of trying to use government power and regulation to get people into houses that they can't afford, and thus drive up home prices and cause this current mess. So
now, what was the talking point of the 2004 Republican convention?
The ownership society. I just said what the Bush line was. Right. Well, and Michelle was criticizing it.
Minority ownership was the greatest policy success of the Bush administration to that point.
Yes, that's what Michelle's argument is. Yeah. So you want an example of conservatives criticizing other conservatives for policy mistakes they made that contributed to this crisis, and I gave you one.
But she's not really. She's accusing Bush of being too liberal.
Yes, that's true. I've done that too.
She's not chastising conservative ideology. She's trying to twist it around and pretend that's liberal ideology. You're right. Speaking of conservatives chastising other conservatives about being liberal, let's talk about McCain. Okay. Well, he's had quite a week.
We all have had quite a week, but he definitely has had a long one. I guess we could start Saturday or Sunday, when all of a sudden this was all Chris Cox's fault?
Well, Andrew Cuomo's going to save us,
right? Right. And yes, the head of HUD, Andrew Cuomo. It was, no, I mean, McCain's role in this has been, as Jennifer Rubin at commentary says, just classic McCain. I don't think you can look at this at McCain's behavior for this week, from saying we should fire Cox to kind of the debate gambit to the bailout, and I'm not surprised. Are you surprised? I mean, George Will had his op-ed earlier this week talking about he's never been a fan of McCain's honor politics, especially when it comes to economics and the bailout. But I mean, were you that surprised by the Cox thing, by the debate thing, by anything McCain has done this week?
McCain does. I mean, I'm getting less and less surprised by it.
I wasn't. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Of course he did.
He's been a very erratic figure in the past week.
Yeah, see, I would just disagree. I would say he's been an erratic figure for some time now.
What I feel is dangerous for his own political prospects. He is trying to build a narrative that he is country first.
Right. Which is what he's trying to fit this into.
Right. I think going back to you probably wouldn't lump Sarah Palin in this, but I think going back.
I've known her for a less longer.
I know we all hate the polar bears, but Sarah Palin, fire Chris Cox, bring in Andrew Cuomo. Before let's have lots of town hall debates, and now let's not have a debate because it's a crisis. They're all starting to feel like stunts. And I know you love Armando at Talk Left.
I do.
Armando has been a Obama skeptic on the left for a while.
Since the beginning. The beginning.
Yeah. Ripping into McCain this week. I mean, basically calling this debate gambit a stunt, and pointing out, if this is so critical that he be in Washington to hammer out this agreement, why is he in New York speaking to the Clinton Global Initiative before he gets to Washington, D.C.? And, of course, many people pointing out the David Letterman clips that got on YouTube before the show even aired last night, and I'm not sure how that even happened. Pointing out Letterman literally getting the live feed from CBS Evening News, showing him getting makeup applied to be interviewed by Katie Couric at the time he said, I can't go on your show, Letterman, because I got to be in D.C. to deal with the bailout.
And then he went on Katie Couric instead. Right.
So it's all feeling like stunts. It's feeling like politics first and not country first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for conservatives, as Jennifer Rubin pointed out, this just fits a long line. Whether it's campaign finance reform or immigration reform or the tobacco legislation, these dramatic, sloughing off the party for the interest of the country is McCain. It's the McCain we know. Now,
McCain also, before this point, McCain was really going hard at the New York Times.
Oh, well, if we could just stay on before we get to the.
I thought that'd be something that conservatives would have been praising.
Right. Well, we can transition to the defense of McCain later, but in about 2 hours, they're supposed to be meeting at the White House between Obama, McCain, and Bush, and congressional leaders, and I think it's safe to say that definitely in this building, I think most conservatives are honestly afraid as to what's going to come out of there. It could be a Kennedy, McCain, immigration, Feingold, McCain, campaign finance reform, housing bailout disaster, and it just underscores how, until Sarah Palin came along, how unexcited many conservatives were about the ticket. Is when it comes to big policy moments like this, we're just dreadfully afraid of what policy is going to come out of McCain.
So does this, because up until this point for the last 3 weeks, conservatives had got on the McCain bandwagon because of Palin.
Right. My favorite picture was one of the Virginia rally. It said Palin voters for McCain, which I think kind of captures, I mean, and the McCain campaign's not even denying it. They're like, yeah, she's a shot in the arm. Everyone loves us. People come to the rallies to see her. And as Jonathan Martin, the Politico reports, they generally kind of, leave after she speaks. So, it's not like a big secret.
But does if there is a deep conservative disaffection, I'm presuming there's going to be some sort of bailout, and that McCain is going to put his stamp of approval on. Although, of course, McCain has zigzagged so much, I suppose I really can't presume anything. But the tone of this whole gambit is something needs to be done, so presumably he's going to do it.
Right. Well, just to stick with Jennifer Rubin's point, she predicted, and I think this is dead on. She said, after disrupting his opponent's prep schedule and making a show of support for a bipartisan deal in Washington, I'm betting he finds sufficient progress is made by Friday to do the debate, and then he suggests switching topics or talking about everything. So I think that's probably what you're going to see is, whatever happens today, because I don't think anything's going to get passed until Saturday. So I think you will see McCain say, I went up there, we struck a deal, we don't have a bill yet, but, everything's generally on the right path, and so we can do this debate again. That's my prediction. We can find out by the time this airs if I'm right or wrong.
So if he is behind a final package, and you got a good chunk of conservatives that think there should be no kind of government involvement in this whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Does that bring you back to, well, fine, his VP is more conservative than he
Mm-hmm.
is, but who cares if the guy at the top is doing policies I don't like?
What's your question?
Is that the base rallying effect
Yeah.
that happened before?
Yeah.
Are we going to see in the blogosphere a depression of that? Or is Palin just powerful enough that just despite
I know. I think
difficult
definitely in the blogosphere you'll see some depression of it. It depends how bad the deal is. It depends, if there's a Chris Dodd housing slush fund in it. It depends if there's a mortgage write down in it. It depends just how bad the final bill is. But I think for your average rank and file conservative voter that party leaders were worried whether or not they turned out or not, I don't think they'll be. I don't think it'll affect their vote.
Now, the other thing he was trying to do, I thought, to rally conservatives was this tete with the New York Times.
Right.
Group News blog had noted that by basically calling the New York Times 150% in the tank for Obama, they invited the New York Times to go back at McCain harder and bring up this Rick Davis story that even though they claimed Rick Davis had no ties to Fannie and Freddie, that his firm was still getting Freddie Mac money, $15,000 a month, and even though he left the firm temporarily and he wasn't directly lobbying, he still has equity in the company's got his name on it. When it's all said and done, he is going to have access to that money.
Yeah, but bottom line, we were able to get at the height of this housing bubble. When conservatives are trying to push that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are the problem here, we got a week's worth of headlines, not just in the New York Times, because after the New York Times ran it, then the USA Today, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, they were all able to run headlines accurately saying, dispute over McCain ties to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Because those are all the headlines. Because now there's a story out there that, there is a dispute over it. And we have, a week's worth of people looking at the paper going, oh, McCain's tied to Freddie Mac, which is just a complete bumbling of the situation. Just amazing that they were able to completely mess that up.
So the conservatives aren't mad that he's going at the Times, but maybe going at the Times on this point was not helpful to the conservative message on Fannie and Freddie. Oh,
well, the conservatives are definitely mad at the New York Times. Carol Platt-Robeau posted at Town Hall. If the New York Times is under the headline is bordering on journalistic malpractice, and then she writes, if the New York Times is going to promote this story that Freddie Mac paid McCain advisor Rick Davis's firm through last month, it would seem appropriate to include two important facts that the Times conveniently left out. Number one, if the lobbying payments were intended to help Freddie Mac cozy up to John McCain himself, they were a dismal failure. And then she cites the congressional record showing that John McCain actually tried to rein in Freddie and Freddie Mac. And then number two, that Rick Davis has not received any compensation from his firm since he left in 2006. And she writes, in light of these facts, it really borders on journalistic malpractice for the Times to run a big story headlines, McCain Aid's firm was paid by Freddie Mac. The clear implication, contrary to fact, is that McCain and or his aide was somehow profited from the now discredited organization. Anytime you pick a fight with the New York Times, conservatives generally are going to be supportive. But then they just messed it up, just with pure incompetence. John Hincke had a post at the Next Right. He first quotes Politico's Ben Smith. This is Ben Smith writing, a McCain campaign call was so rife with simple and often inexplicable misstatements of fact that it may deepen the perception, dangerous to McCain, that he and his aides have little regard for factual accuracy. And then he quotes Michael Goldfarb, who was at the Weekly Standard and is now McCain's official blogger. The Politico is quibbling with ridiculous small details when the basic things are completely right. And then John Hincke quotes, writes himself, details are important, get them right. Until you manage that, don't complain about the media. And I felt the exact same way. They had such a strong case on the merits and the facts, and they completely punted it, bungled it away by exaggerating and throwing in other useless untruths. And it just goes to a larger, complete mishandling of being able to drive the Freddie Fannie story. Instead of sticking to a conservative regulation is the problem, government intervention, Fannie Freddie is the problem. Instead, we have all this. It's Chris Cox's fault. And like you said earlier, McCain's trying to show that he's a better regulator than Obama. He's going to out-regulate Obama. Republicans are always going to lose that fight. You can never out-regulate Democrats. Democrats are going to regulate you to death. It's just, conservatives are frustrated with the way McCain has handled this week, this mortgage meltdown, this Wall Street financial stuff. And McCain warned us about it. He told us earlier in the primaries that, economics weren't his thing, and he just insists on proving himself right.
Well, I do think conservatives must be dancing with glee this week because they won on getting rid of the coastal drilling ban. I would think there'd be celebrations all over the place.
It ain't dead yet, honey.
Oh, well, I thought that just the mere utterance of it was going to have a psychological benefit that was going to drive down prices immediately, that the markets would incorporate that, because we were taking drilling seriously now. I mean, just having the House protest in August was enough, apparently, to drive down prices. So has everyone run out and got all the cheap gas they can get now that the ban is clearly dead?
It ain't dead yet, because Reid is put it back in the Senate's version of the continuing resolution. So as
that was just involving shale, I thought.
As fun as it was that the House passed their ban, it's not law yet. So we'll see. But
well, just so people are clear, there's a current ban on most coastal drilling.
Oh yes, we didn't go back to.
It expires at the end of this month, and so if no action is taken to renew it, it expires.
Right. Every year it has been reinstated through the Interior Appropriations Bill.
And there's stopgap financing that because all these appropriation bills haven't been passed for the next fiscal year, so they have to pass what's known as called a continuing resolution to keep the government operating. Conservatives have threatened to say if you try to extend the ban or even modify the ban, scale it back, we're going to throw a temper tantrum and shut down the government. And Democrats appear to have blinked, and the House continuing resolution does not include it. But you're saying that I'd read something that Harry Reid was including something regarding oil shale development in his version. But I did not read anything that he was going to maintain the entire coastal drilling ban in the Senate version. Is that you have different information than that?
I saw the red flashing lights on Red State, and it said Reid not ending oil ban. So I don't. Maybe it was just oil shale instead of offshore drilling. But as Meteor Blades at Daily Coast pointed out, the Democrats are already signaling that it's going to be a quite temporary ban because the continuing resolution is only going to go through March. And as David Obey was widely quoted in the Associated Press, this next election will decide what the future of oil drilling, offshore oil drilling policy is. So, yeah.
Well, like most environmentalists are not that sanguine about it.
Are that what?
So not that sanguine about the future prospects. I mean, basically, if you couldn't, there needs to be a fresh shift in public opinion on this subject that's clear and demonstrable to get the entire Democratic caucus behind reinstating the ban in some way, which clearly doesn't exist right now. The caucus is divided over it, and no one wants to clearly make the case for it in this current environment. So I don't think there's any presumption on the part of folks that even if Obama won, that the ban will just magically come back into place. As a lot of the past summer shows, just because you have the numbers doesn't necessarily mean you get the policy if you're not making your arguments well.
Right, but let's be clear here. If Obama wins, his Interior Department will be making these leases and writing the regulations for these leases, which would be vastly different than having a pro drilling
sleep and do drugs with the oil industry.
No, Obama's
going
to keep those people. They keep the interior swinging. It's a fun place to work. Yeah, no, I mean, you're going to have a more Democratic House and Senate, a Democratic president. So I think anyone objectively looking at the situation would say that it's going to be a lot less offshore oil available in the law passed by the next Congress administration than this one.
Nevertheless, the argument made by conservatives in August was the mere fact that drilling was being discussed, that the House protest was happening, that in of itself signaled to the markets the seriousness of America to drill more, and that drove prices down immediately.
Immediately.
That was their argument. And it would be hard to argue that actually letting the ban lapse is far more tangible than having a temper tantrum on the House floor. You would think by that same logic that prices would drop even more. Yet I believe they dropped from today to yesterday a penny. I'm sure you guys will love to make more excuses and more rationalizations why prices aren't dropping more, when the argument always has been from our side, based on what Bush's Energy Department said, that there's not enough oil in these places to lower the price of oil in any significant fashion over the next 20 years.
Yeah, we'll see. I would make 2 points. First of all, I think we saw the numbers drop over the summer because it was the first time that oil traders, people looking at the market participants saw that there was a strong shift in American opinion the other way, and that now that has kind of topped off and gas prices were already falling for other reasons, people don't see the prospect of that turning around, so they don't see any more pressure to change policy. But I do think you make a good point, which is when I first saw the headline early this week, I thought it was a genius move by the Democrats, because now you do have, like you said, this ban go into effect for 6 months, during which time no leases are going to be able to get made, especially if Obama administration comes in January. So the last 3 months are sunk anyways. And then they can turn around and just make the argument to make is that, look, we had this ban for 6 months, and oil prices were not affected when we didn't have the ban. So go ahead, let's go ahead and bring the ban back. I think that's why I think it's a genius move by the Democrats to let it expire for 6 months.
No, it's potentially a genius move because it's very factually sound.
We'll see. We'll see when it comes around if the Democrats are ready to make the case that they shouldn't.
What Newt Gingrich said and what John McCain said. When folks are making arguments that even if you lifted the ban, it would take years for things to happen. It would be 7 years before you even got a drop of oil. It would be 20 years before you saw any price decreases. The argument was, oh, no, this could be done in months. We will drill now, and we will pay less immediately. So, clock is running.
Yeah, I get them. I just don't think anyone with any knowledge of the oil industry, knows that this is not a real drop of the ban. Is that there's no way, and that the quickest drilling that could happen, the ones off the Pacific coast, the ones that were already running in 6 days before the ban first went in, those are the ones that would be able to get going shorter.
Most leading conservatives made completely disingenuous arguments in the course of this
No, I'm arguing that this is a phony lifting of the ban. It's a 6 months.
The ban is gone. Go get a lease. Go get them.
It's a 6 month phony window in which nothing can happen because people know the Democrats are going to come back in and shut it down. So it's not a lifting of the ban.
The argument was this could happen in months. That is how fast drilling could occur.
I don't think anyone said in months. I think the line was 5 years.
Months was said. I will get those quotes for you.
Go right ahead.
Should we end it on that note, sir?
Yes. I think we're pushing the 50-minute mark.
All right. Always good to talk to you, sir.
And we'll see each other next week, or one of us is taking off.
Okay. Have a good weekend.